TCU quarterback Max Duggan might be an imperfect quarterback prospect, but he is elite when it comes to character. Is that enough to make him a perfect fit for the New Orleans Saints in the 2023 NFL Draft? We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. It is daily fantasy made easy. They are also the presenters of all of the Crossover Thursday episodes across the entire Locked On NFL network. You can catch the Eagles and Saints crossover from earlier today. Over at Prize Picks, all you got to do is pick 2 to 5 players, choose whether or not they're going to come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projection. Get those right, and you can get up to 10 times your entry back in winnings. And if you're a first-time user, you can get a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100 by using promo code LOCKEDON over at prizepicks.com and the Prize Picks app. Once again, that's promo code LOCKEDON. On today's episode, we're discussing quarterback prospect in this year's 2023 NFL Draft, Max Duggan, the TCU quarterback. Could he be a good option for the New Orleans Saints? And could he be a good fit for the New Orleans Saints in their offensive approach, whatever that offensive approach looks like as they move forward? We're going to take a look at 3 things. We'll end by taking a look at this kind of optimal situation for him, as well as what his draft stock might do, because this weekend it has an opportunity to take a huge step forward. We'll break down strengths and weaknesses, including the concerning weaknesses and improvements necessary that make him a guy that maybe isn't drafted as high as some might expect, the Heisman runner-up. But first, I want to speak on Max Duggan's elite character, because that's who he is, at least with what we have available to us in terms of information right now. Y'all know how the draft process can be. It gets a little weird sometimes, but everything that we've heard about Max Duggan so far is absolutely remarkable. This is a guy that he's not in a situation where he was, one of those walk-ons that had to fight his way in or anything, the Baker Mayfields of the world or anything like that. He's a guy that was a 4-star prospect. He turned down Ohio State. He chose to go to TCU. He was not one of those guys. Oh, he was the player of his state, player of the year in his state of Iowa, coming out of or going into college. He's not one of those guys that was unsung for a long time and felt like he needed to prove a bunch of people wrong. He's at 6'2", or just around 200 pounds. He was the Heisman Trophy runner-up, threw for 3,321 passing yards so far this season, with still at least one game to go, as TCU, of course, is in the college football playoffs. 30 passing touchdowns, just 4 interceptions on a career. He passes the 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio mark by quite a bit. 165.5 QBR, or quarterback rating. He's had 2 years, this is his second straight year above 150. So he had a very solid season in 2021 as well. He's not one of those guys that just kind of came out of nowhere. 64.9% completion percentage, 404 rushing yards that he added on top of that, along with 6 rushing touchdowns as well. So he loads up the stat sheet everywhere. He's an incredibly talented player. He's also surpassed 500 rushing yards twice, also putting up 10 rushing touchdowns in his second season at TCU. His teammates love being his teammates. Receiver Tay Barber said, "That's our quarterback. That's the guy that you want to be your quarterback. That's the guy you want to play for." People love being this guy's teammate, and coaches love coaching him as well. You had a coach of his talk about, it was Sonny Dykes, who said that he is, he gets kind of emotional talking about him after the Big 12 loss, where you saw Max Duggan get very, very emotional with that loss up against Kansas State. And he said, it's just because of the way that he handles things, the way that you want your son to handle that situation. That's just about as good a compliment as you can give somebody. I mean, this dude is all about character. He said that he actually said this on Wednesday today, that current New Orleans Saints quarterback Andy Dalton called him after the loss to Kansas State in that Big 12 championship and kind of gave him some words of encouragement and all that. I'll try to ask Andy about that later on this week or potentially early next week to see if I can figure out exactly maybe some more of the content of that conversation. The other thing that I enjoy about Duggan is his approach to the game. He's not somebody that creates adversity and tries to be in a situation to where he's trying to prove people that doubted him wrong. Instead, he goes about football kind of the way that I go about life. So maybe this is why I like it so much, is that he's trying to prove the people that are in his corner right. He tries to prove the people that have bought in on him right. He's not worried about the people that don't believe in him. He's not worried about the people that said things negatively about him and trying to prove them wrong. He wants to prove the people that believe in him right. I love that attitude. Again, that might just be a personal thing, though. He doesn't try to create adversity. He's already experienced enough of it. This is a guy that didn't miss a game in 2020, despite having a 9-hour procedure that placed a catheter in his neck as well as in his groin to help with a heart issue and a heart condition that was just randomly discovered at one point. And then that had to be followed up 2 days later with another procedure to help remove a blood clot. Did not miss a game. Also fought through an ankle injury over in 2021. That might be a situation to where I kind of pump the brakes a little bit and say, whoa, hold up, little man. Like, take care of yourself. Like, don't go out there playing on a busted ankle and all this other stuff. But outside of that, I mean, this dude has done, he's managed every bit of adversity that's been ahead of him. And he does it on the football field as well. He's led 7 comeback victories so far in 2022. And that's the most amongst all college quarterbacks so far this season. So he's a guy that you never count out. That's always going to fight, scratch, claw, do whatever he's got to do to get a win by the end of the game. He could be one of those guys where if he develops over time and becomes a starting NFL quarterback that racks up those fourth quarter comebacks, those comeback victories, all of that. He is somebody that you can never count out in a game, at least at the college level. He just does not quit, and he has a ton of talent as well. But is he the right fit for the New Orleans Saints? Or even for the NFL as a whole? Now we're going to get to his strengths and his weaknesses on the field, because unfortunately, some of his weaknesses are going to be major concerns at the next level if he can't show before entering the NFL that they can be cleaned up. We're going to get to that as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. In today's episode, it's brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that you're sure to love. That's why you'll be able to find a bonus episode from The League as an episode over on our Locked On NFL audio podcast. It is a podcast that's narrated by Super Bowl champion and, of course, legendary trash talker Richard Sherman, as well as rising star and sports broadcaster Taylor Rooks, where they bring you behind the scenes in this 8-part docuseries about some of the most bizarre, inspirational, and unlikely stories connected to America's favorite sport, the game of pro football. The bonus episode is called The Way of the Cowboy, which is an incredible story about the 1977 Dallas Cowboys and the fact that they brought in Bruce Lee's protege to teach their defense martial arts, thereby ushering in an entirely new approach to the way that the league trained. Every story is delivered in equal parts history, entertainment, and social commentary as well. So head over to Locked On NFL for the bonus episode of The League, or you can catch the full series wherever you get your podcasts, available now. Audible, get in the game. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. The prospect of Max Duggan is such an appealing one for any New Orleans Saints fan or any fan that is any fan of a team that is in need of a quarterback. He's the Heisman runner-up. He's got elite character. He's a never give up type of guy. He's gritty. He's all of those things. But there are some concerns around his game that could make it challenging for him to translate to the next level and could specifically create some issues for him with the New Orleans Saints. We appreciate you, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out Locked On Sports today as well to get all the news from behind the scoreboard, beyond the scoreboard, behind the scenes with the Locked On local experts, including everything going on with Derek Carr right now. Your boy Q, Peter Bukowski, breaking it down over at Locked On Sports today. So let's break down some of Max Duggan, I'm going to do that a couple of times. I apologize. Max Duggan's strengths and weaknesses. The weaknesses are kind of the thing that I'm going to hone in on the most, but it is worth kind of highlighting his strengths as well, because you want to know kind of like where this guy is in terms of what you can build around. That's what scouting is. Scouting, usually, you spend more time worrying about what the prospect can do than worrying about what they can't do unless it's glaringly obvious. And that's kind of where some of these things file in. he is a 100% guy that will come in and out effort any other player on the field. There's no doubt about that. He's got good touches on deep passes when he can get those passes down there. Operates really well in the quick passing game, probably where he's most comfortable as a passer, but is also an athletic and capable player in the run game as well. Can run designed runs in a system over in TCU that asked him to do that a ton, because they were married to the run game, even though they were an air raid style passing offense as well. We'll break that down a little bit for you and tell you what that means about his ability to translate to the NFL. Can be a pain to tackle sometimes despite his size. Obviously a fantastic leader, checks all of those intangibles boxes. Again, at least with what we know so far. Checks just about every, if not every box when it comes to the Parcells draftable quarterback scale as well. And also adds mobility as an additional factor there by raising his floor a little bit. And he's a very good decision maker. Again, 30 touchdown passes as opposed to 4 interceptions. Has taken a lot of sacks, though. If you watched the Texas game, you certainly saw that. So where are the concerning weaknesses, and where is it that the improvements that are necessary could potentially disrupt his ability to translate to the next level? Let's go over all of his weaknesses here in terms of what I saw from his tape, and of course picked up from other folks as well. Concerning accuracy issues, we see that particularly in the short and intermediate area of the game. Again, he's got good touch when he can get the ball downfield in those sort of deeper passes, but arm strength is not elite. But does that really matter at the NFL level? I think many quarterbacks right now are showing you that it's helpful, obviously, when that's a part of your game. But even Andy Dalton is throwing 50-yard bombs to Rashid Shaheed. So it is what it is. Frenetic, absolutely, when it comes to anticipating pressure. You see him never really get comfortable in the pocket. Happy feet is what it's called. Bouncing around all over the place, kind of, shuffling around, trying to get through those progressions really quickly, uses his entire body. His mechanics are a little bit off, things like that. And a lot of that just has to do with sort of that internal clock and him kind of frantically or frenetically anticipating that pressure. And that causes him to never really look comfortable beyond his first read when in the pocket. And speaking of in the pocket, lacks some awareness there. Doesn't really detect that pressure until it's right on top of him. Like he's already sacked by then. You saw that a ton in that Texas game. Runs into pressure sometimes when he's trying to scramble. So he's a good designed runner, not the greatest kind of improviser as a rushing quarterback or a scrambling quarterback. Kind of the same thing that we've seen from Taysom Hill, though Taysom Hill's had a couple of those big runs, just like we saw from Max Duggan as well. He had a big 40-yard scamper in that Big 12 game, all of those other things as well. Does come from an adjusted air raid scheme. So that's going to put a little bit of a stamp on him, but because he's coming from an air raid scheme, but there is something important there. It's an adjusted air raid scheme. It's a run first approach. They're actually top 25, number 25, in fact, in both rushing offense and passing offense. You don't see that with other air raid systems like Mississippi State, Washington State, USC. You don't see that with some of these other teams as well. But so even though they do use a lot of air raid passing concepts, evenly spaced out, 2x2s, open 3x1s, things like that, that just means that 2 receivers on one side, 2 receivers on the other side, equidistant from one another. 3 receivers equidistant from one another on one side, 1 receiver on the opposite side, equidistant to one of those guys, mirrored, all those other things. So it just means that it's an open concept and a lot of spreading those defenses laterally and vertically, right? So it's a combination of what the New Orleans Saints did with Drew Brees in his later years and did with Drew Brees in his early years in terms of attacking vertically. So it's not completely untranslatable to the New Orleans Saints system, but we also don't know exactly what the New Orleans Saints system is going to look like next year, but hard to imagine they're going to go too far away from the NFL game. And those concepts have some trouble translating to the NFL game. You can ask Cliff Kingsbury, but it's not unworkable. Those pieces, him coming from that sort of adjusted air raid system, every quarterback has to make an adjustment at the next level. That would not be specific. My biggest concerns around Max Duggan are the weaknesses when it comes to being in the pocket, and then the accuracy issues as well. I don't mean that any quarterback that can be mobile is a weakness. It's just that if you're going to be a guy that majority of the time, which Max Duggan would be, is going to be a pocket passer, you got to be able to be comfortable there. You got to be able to do both. You can't just do one over the other unless you're going to be, supremely and only what's the word I'm looking for? Exclusively a pocket passer that's not going to run, which I don't think is what you need in today's NFL. if a quarterback is not going to have an easy time perceiving pressure, stepping up in the pocket, and delivering accurate passes in the short and intermediate areas of the game, it's going to be hard to see how that game translates to the NFL. And it's going to be specifically hard to see how that game translates to the New Orleans Saints. Even this year, the New Orleans Saints have been most efficient in the intermediate area, even with Andy Dalton, who does have a bit more arm strength than Drew Brees had at the later portions of his career later on in the seasons. You're still seeing the Saints attacking 10 to 19 yards downfield. That's a place where Max Duggan has struggled. So it puts him firmly in that draft and develop category, which could be an issue for the New Orleans Saints, who haven't shown an ability to draft and develop quarterbacks ever. I mean, Archie, maybe. Like, that wasn't really even a draft and develop. That was a draft and start because he was plug and play ready to go. And so it's hard to sort of see where the New Orleans Saints, as constructed on their coaching staff, unless Ronald Curry is the difference, right? Because he's the one person we haven't really seen get an opportunity to develop a quarterback over the course of years. Yes, he came in at the same time as Ian Book, but Ian Book didn't last long enough to see how Ronald Curry was able to help develop him. But what we have seen Ronald Curry do is get Jameis Winston ready to start, get Taysom Hill ready to start, get Ian Book ready to start, even though, he didn't have a good time with it, but the entire team was basically out there. He's also worked to get Andy Dalton ready to start. So you have seen at least that from Ronald Curry. So maybe he ends up being the X factor in terms of the quarterback development issues that the Saints have had in the past, in terms of developing young quarterback talent. But we could also see his stock rise above that, depending upon his performance against Michigan and potentially beyond. If the Saints want to make a move for Max Duggan, where would they have to draft him? And what would be the best situation to put him in? That's what we're going to answer next as we continue on with and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints presented by Bet Online. Bet Online, your number one source for all the sports wagering information that you need. Everything in terms of odds, lines, props. They've got news. They've got scores. They've even got sports podcasts. And I know you love sports podcasts because you're watching and listening to this one. You can go and find more over at Bet Online, the quickest and easiest way to get caught up on all of the trends and action. That's over at betonline.net. Right now, Bet Online has the New Orleans Saints as 6-point underdogs on the road in Philadelphia against the Philadelphia Eagles. That is right now with Jalen Hurts still working his way back, returned to practice on Wednesday. Will that line move? And does that mean you want to get in on those odds right now? You might want to go and check them out today at betonline.net, or you want to keep an eye on them once you hear about what happens with Jalen Hurts, because that might open that line up a little bit more, give you an opportunity to a greater opportunity for the New Orleans Saints to potentially cover even if they lose. So if you want to go and check that out, you can find them on your mobile app or your desktop today. It's betonline.net, where the game starts. Today's episode also brought to you by the National Highway and Traffic Safety Association. Did you know that driving high is considered driving under the influence? Yeah, that's right. Driving under the influence of marijuana is against law in every state, even in states where marijuana is legal. So if you don't want to get a DUI, don't get high and drive. So here's the rhyme that you can remember. That means driving high will get you a DUI. That's all you got to remember. That's all you got to remember. And if you think that law enforcement officers can't tell that you're driving high, you're wrong. Your friends can tell. Your coworkers can tell. Your parents can tell. Your friends can tell. I said that already. Everyone can tell. So what makes you think that law enforcement officers can't tell if you're driving high? Driving under the influence can slow your response time and change how you perceive time and speed. So even if you think you're fine to drive when you're high, you're not. Because the bottom line is, if you feel different, you drive different. And because driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high, get a DUI, paid for by the National Highway Traffic Safety Association. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Max Duggan's draft position. It will entirely depend upon how he performs against Michigan in the first round of the college football playoffs. There's a whole bunch here to consider. He will enter the NFL draft a little bit earlier than maybe some folks over at TCU might have expected. That's something that really rubbed TCU fans, TCU writers, all of that the wrong way. I don't think that really matters to anyone else, though. I think for the most part, that doesn't all of a sudden start to raise some character concerns for you or anything like that. He did declare on the 18th before he ends up playing in the game this weekend against Michigan in the college football playoff. So a lot of question marks have kind of popped up around that. But again, those are more local question marks than they are actual like evaluator question marks or anything like that. I guess people would have rather that he played those games first and then declared for the NFL draft, worrying that it would cause some type of confusion. I think it probably actually rallies the team around them to say, okay, let's make sure we send you off with in a better situation. And for a quarterback, staying for an extra year is, I struggle with that. I'll just be honest with you. I struggle with that idea, right? Do you stay for an extra year and then potentially throw 6 interceptions instead of 4 interceptions only for everyone to then point their fingers at you and tell you that you regressed? Or do you stay and throw 4 interceptions again for everyone to just kind of then point to that and say, well, he was remotely the same. He should have come out a year before. Now he's just a year older, or potentially, of course, risk injury. Like that razor thin margin for showing improvement by saying an extra year when you just had a year like Max Duggan has had, leading TCU to a 12-1 season off of a multi-loss season the year before to a college football championship. I mean, that's pretty good in terms of where his draft stock is going to be. So where is that draft stock? A lot of folks have considered him a day 3 pick. If he were to, if the draft were today, I think that's more likely going to be a day 2 pick. Some people have even said a late day 3 pick. I would imagine that at the worst, he's probably an early day 3 pick. I think we tend to, especially after last year, kind of underestimate the quarterback position and what that designation does for you in the draft process. It didn't show last year, but that doesn't mean that it won't show this year. The NFL underdrafted quarterbacks last year, which means they're going to panic overdraft quarterbacks this year. That's the way that I look at sort of the ebb and flow of draft process and draft stock, or what Trey Wingo called on the show not too long ago, the NFL draft industrial complex, right? And in the way that all kind of ebbs and flows. So I think that by the end of this week, he'll probably be a day 2 prospect, especially if he performs well against Michigan. Because if he performs well against Michigan in the first round of the college championship or the college playoffs, and TCU even goes on to win that game, and then he has a subpar performance in the national championship game, the fact that he had a great game against Michigan, or potentially even led them to a win against Michigan, is going to raise his draft stock to being a day 2 guy in the NFL draft. And a failed performance or a subpar performance in the national championship is not going to knock him back down. That high is going to remain for him. So the Saints have 2 day 2 selections currently. They've got one in the second round, one in the third round. So you might be able to reach for him and grab him in the second round, which is currently projected to be in the low 40s, 40, or let's say early 40s, 40, 41. But you could potentially still get him that early in the third round as well, or potentially even trade up in the third, or trade up from the third round if you needed to. The best situation for him, so that's where the Saints could draft him. Day 2 in either round, they could potentially pass on him with a second round selection and then move up to get him with a third round selection, or wait and see if he's still there with the third round selection if he's the guy that they wanted to go for. The best situation to put him in if you were to draft him is basically for the Saints to return Andy Dalton. That would be the best situation specifically for Max Duggan. This isn't me. I know people getting their feelings about Jameis Winston and stuff like that. I don't think Jameis Winston will return to New Orleans, even if they wanted him back in New Orleans after the way that things went this year. So with that being the case, bringing back Andy Dalton is very, very possible for the New Orleans Saints, who don't have the money to go out and get an all-star quarterback without a specific draw like a Sean Payton. So with that being the case, if the Saints were to retain Andy Dalton or bring in another veteran quarterback, drafting Max Duggan to sit behind that quarterback for a couple of years is probably what would be best for him. Small frame, 6'2", 200 pounds, right around there. Accuracy issues, pressure reading concerns, those things are a big deal. They're not unfixable. However, you just have to have the time to get him in the system that will support those things and give him the outlets to improve those things. Even if those things don't actually change, but you're able to mask them with the operation of the offense, you got to give him time to learn the system. And I think that would be more than possible for Max Duggan. He's never proved to be a me over the team type of guy before, so it wouldn't be an issue for him to be brought into the NFL to sit back and learn for a little while. The Saints are all about the big team, little me concept, and that's a situation that Duggan looks like he would buy into no problem. So I don't think that there's an issue with the idea of saying, come through, sit back. It is possible that you look at Duggan and say, yeah, he'll be a career backup in the NFL. But if he can improve those core points that we've highlighted in today's episode, he could prove to be a more reliable option if he's ever called upon and if he ever needs to be more than that. If you put him in a quick pass, run heavy system like the one that New Orleans has started to develop at the end of this season, but also very likely will continue to maintain as an identity down the road, then those are the things that are going to allow him to be at his best and would allow him to be able to operate safely when called upon. And the New Orleans Saints, just like TCU's offense, would be one that would be run heavy, would be one that would have quick pass concepts built in as a core value within their system and philosophy, but will still take those star shots down the field, those moonshots down the field if they need to or when they're ready to, which is something that Duggan is very much familiar with that air raid, run heavy, run first blend type of system that they've created over there with the Horned Frogs. So all told, when it comes down to day 2 quarterback prospects, as we understand them today, that means right now, no CJ Stroud, no Bryce Young, no Will Levis, and probably no Anthony Richardson. If we were to assume that those are all day 1 prospects, if we look just at day 2 prospects, I'd probably still put Tennessee's Hendon Hooker. Yes, even with the ACL injury, depending upon what we learn about him through the medical process, we're going to get a lot more information over the course of the offseason. But today, with what we know, I would put Tennessee's Hendon Hooker, and I would probably personally put BYU's Jaren Hall above Max Duggan for right now as optimal draft picks for the New Orleans Saints. I like the mobility aspect that they bring, and they've got a little bit more comfort in the pocket on quick read system. So you still, and all 3 of these guys, you got to change a little bit of the offensive system to make it work for them in any case. But depending on what you want, right? This is us talking about having a starter in 2022, or excuse me, a starter in 2023 or a starter in 2024. But if you're okay with bringing somebody in that is a good but albeit imperfect prospect to develop till probably the 3rd year of his rookie contract, if that's what you're looking for, then Max Duggan is a really, really great option. Although he's not going to be an NFL-ready prospect from what we've seen so far in 2023, maybe not in 2024. So it depends on what you're looking for. But Duggan should not be ruled out by any case. But 2nd round, there are better quarterbacks, in my opinion, that are more NFL ready that would fit well for the New Orleans Saints. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the game plan to beat the Philadelphia Eagles. We haven't seen the New Orleans Saints be able to do it since Jalen Hurts took over as their starting quarterback, including his first career start. So what do they have to do to limit him and get a win? We'll break that down. And we'll also continue to look at reloading the New Orleans Saints roster over the course of the offseason. We broke down earlier in the week how you can do it without a 1st-round pick. But now let's get more specific, and we'll kind of do a little bit of an early mock offseason, including free agency signings and draft picks in tomorrow's 2nd episode of the day. Appreciate you as always making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day. Got all that coming up for you on Friday. Of course, we have an earlier episode for your crossover Thursday if you're looking for more content around the Saints and Eagles game upcoming this weekend. As always, make sure you also go and check out Locked On Sports Today as your 2nd listen today or your next listen today whenever you catch this episode. Appreciate you for making us your first listen and for making me a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. If you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.